The ravens came back with frost on their wings. They dropped from the pale morning sky in ragged sweeps, black against the pallor, as if the wind itself were flinging bits of night at the wall and seeing what would stick. Jon stood on the outer parapet, the ice slick as glass beneath his boots, and watched a handful of birds settle on the merlons to croak at him, heads cocked, eyes bright as beads of pitch. Snow sifted down, almost reluctant, as if the air were exhausted with carrying winter and could do no more than let winter fall. Ghost was a white smudge at his back, ears sharp to sounds Jon could not hear. Far below, the yard of Castle Black rang with iron and shouted orders. The Queen's men were drilling in their crimson and gold-hued mail that looked wrong in this place of gray and black. The smell of their fires, there's always smelled different, spiced and smoke-sweet, trailed on the wind. From the west came the low groan of ice shifting within ice, a sound like a great beast turning in its sleep. The raven on the merlon nearest Jon bobbed, opened its beak and said, "Snow," with an eagerness that never failed to prick a half-smile out of him. He reached and stroked its bleak head with a gloved finger. "Aye," he said, "snow and more snow. Lord Commander." Bowen Marsh climbed from the inner stairs, breath fogging, fat cheeks windburned. He had wrapped himself in furs until he looked a bundle with a dour face. "A rider at the gate. Eastwatch sent him on. Says he bears letters. One bears the seal of a southern prince. It would be some lordly plea for aid that Jon could not grant, or a demand for fealty that he would not give. A southern prince, there were fewer of those than there had been. Jon glanced once at the horizon, a line rubbed faint by distance, and then followed Bowen down the stair, Ghost a whisper at his heel. They crossed the muddy yard, mud despite the cold where so many boots churned, and past a circle of wildling children playing at sticking carved crow effigies with sticks while Tormund Thunderfist bellowed something filthy and affectionate at them. The Queen's men were a little apart from the rest, as ever, and their glances flicked like knife points. Melisandre of Ashai stood in the lee of the armory, her red wool bright as coals in the bleached world, watching the sky that watched nothing back. The rider waited within the common hall, thawing by a fire that cast light like honey on old wood. He wore a salt-stained cloak the color of sand and had the face of a man who had grown up looking into heat shimmer, not snow glare. The Black brothers had taken his weapons, but not his pride. He stood straight and he looked at Jon as if he had ridden a long way and would be offended if it were for nothing. "Lord Commander," the rider said, in a low voice with an accent that softened consonants into something like a caress, "I bear messages for Jon Snow, son of Eddard Stark. One with the crescent and son of House Martell. One with a sigil that looks like grass to me, but the man who gave it to me called them reeds." The hall became a shell of wood around a different sound, a single beat in Jon's chest that had the quality of a hand closing. He took the sealed roll the man offered. "Sun and spear, cinnabar on a field of tawny wax." The second was a smaller scrap of parchment bound with a twist of plaited rush, the seal pressed with some creature that might have been a lizard lion if one squinted. "The first is to be read by you alone and burned," the rider said. "The second is to be kept as token. I am to wait for reply if reply there is." "And who sent you?" Jon asked. "The Prince of Dorne sent me from Sunspear, but not with these. These I took at the Planky town from a low boat that came swimming down the Greenblood under oars in the dusk, and that boat is said to belong to the Crannogman of Greywater. I am Colin Sand," he added, offhand but watchful, "and I am a bastard of Dorne, which may matter to you or may not." Jon weighed the parchment in his palm. Heat from the fire had seeped into the wax seal. When he pressed a thumb to it, it gave, and the impression blurred as if the sun itself had melted. He broke it and unrolled the letter. The script was small and careful, the hand of a man who took pains to leave nothing ambiguous. "To Jon Snow, son of Eddard Stark. Winter bites more keenly than most Southron men care to believe. For that reason, and for others, I shall dispense with flowery courtesy. My name is Doran Martell, and I have a daughter who once as a girl swore to me she would never wed a man who could not first name the constellations over his own head. I have a son who went to a dragon and did not return. I have a sister who died when all the laws of gods and men were broken in the name of a king's triumph. And once, I had a friend who loved a woman with a howl in her heart, and he whispered to me the truth of that love on a day when the sea was gentle and the sun cruel. There are debts that have waited too long to be paid. You will know by now what was done at the Twins. If you do not, let me tell you that I do, and that the sands of Dorne thirst no less keenly than the snows of the north for redress. House Martell has remained outwardly at peace because the spear that thrusts too soon breaks, and because I chose to keep my people from a war they could not win alone. We are not alone now. The lions are slumbering on heaps of gold within a city whose faith eats itself. The roses sniff for wind. The krakens tangle their own arms. The stags that remain are pale shadows. If you are the man that Robb Stark believed you to be, then you will have something I do not. The love of hard men who bend to no southern wind. I have something you do not. Coin freighted in casks and ships that can kiss the bite in any season, and spears that will not balk at marching through snow to set wrong things right. I will not flatter you. I will trade, blood for blood, oath for oath. The North raises its banners, and Dorne sets its cause in your hands. I ask that you do not waste men against a Lannister while another watches. I ask that you make ready for more than one war, and if the time comes for dragons to cross the narrow sea, I ask that you stand where honor and prudence both would bid you stand. A boatman of the green blood has borne to you also a small token from a house that has not floated the same as it once did, though it floats still. The bearer of this letter has the rest. If you are swift of mind, you will know where that token comes from and why I send it. I invite you to a meeting not in my hall, and not in yours. If you are still the Night's Watch's man that Ned Stark taught you to be, you may not come. If you have died to yourself and been born again to duty, then come to the bog where the stones watch over the slow water, and there we shall speak and each show what we bring. My daughter Arianne will go in my stead, for I am not a man made for cold journeys any longer. Whatever you decide, burn this letter. Doran Nimeros Martell. By the end, Jon's hand had tightened until the parchment crinkled and the edge bit his thumb. The token. He drew his eyes to the smaller scrap. He did not break that seal. He untwisted it and unrolled it gently, as though it were the skin of something that might bruise. A braid of hair lay nested in the parchment, dark, long, bound at one end with a faded length of blue. For a moment the hall's noise went as flatly distant as thunder beyond mountains. His hand moved, his hand touched the braid, and his fingers felt the roughness of age that lay on it like dust. He could smell nothing through the old oils of the strands, nothing but the memory of something wild and soft. Ghost pressed his bristled muzzle against Jon's hip and huffed, and the sound was the same sound he had made the night that Lady had climbed the hill to the crypt and laid her cheek to the stone where her brother slept. Jon closed his eyes and saw a girl on a horse blazing under a ragged storm flag. He saw a tower of pale stone, and 3 men in cloaks white as winter's first kiss, and a sword laid in a lap. He saw his father kneel in a pool made of grief and shade. He wrapped the braid again and tied it as it had been, with the useless instinct of a man trying to restore a thing to a time that had already ended. Bowen Marsh cleared his throat. "Shall I have the man fed and put to a pallet?" he asked. "He looks half-frozen." "Fed," Jon said. "And find me the red woman." Bowen turned without question. He would have asked questions if the seal had been a wolf. A sun and spear meant something else, something distant and therefore less dangerous. Bowen had served his whole life guarding a pass and had learned too well how to fear what came through the pass. Melisandre arrived with the fire in her eyes like the shard of a sunset that never went away. Jon handed her the letter without the token. Her brows rose the half-inch that was her idea of shock. "The Prince of Dorne writes like a man who has looked a long time into the same pool," she said when she had finished, and then she fed the parchment to the hearth and watched it curl and blacken and collapse. "The flames show me a sun with spears around it walking through snows that go to the waist. They show me a boy's face and a woman's hand in his hair, the hand of a woman who smells of the wind. I saw this before and did not see it. The Lord of Light delights in jests that are not jests." "I am of the watch," Jon said. hearing in his own voice the sound of an answer given 100 times. I cannot march south. I cannot raise banners. What did your father teach you, Lord Snow? Melisandre asked him softly, not in her sermon voice, not in that chiming tongue she used to turn men into fires. Duty is a path like a valley. You may walk it on one side or the other. The river is the same. My father taught me to keep my vows. And your father kept his, Melisandre murmured, until there were two vows in the world that could not sit in the same room. Then he did what he did, and the realm took him for a traitor and a fool. And you? You will hold your vow while the snows heap themselves to the sky over you, if that is what is required. Her eyes were not unkind. But I tell you this, Jon Snow, you cannot hold your vow within a grave. Men who are killed by small letters sent from a smug man's hall do not keep many vows afterward. What are you telling me? I am telling you I see a sun in snow. Could be the son of Dorne. It could be the sun that looks down on all things when they are laid bare on the ice. If she wanted to frighten him, she had succeeded only in making him feel more awake. Jon closed his fingers around the Rushtide token. I hold council tonight. The king is gone to collect what banners he can. His queen is in her chamber, and her men in my yard. It will do us no harm to hear a prince's daughter in a reedman's bog, if we can hear her without breaking oaths. I will send men to Little Hall to ask of Howland Reed how a man keeps a promise without losing his soul. Send who you like, Melisandre said, but bid them bring salt. The crannogmen feed their guests on fish and secrets. Neither tastes well without salt. When she had gone, he took the token and the hair beneath and carried them to the Lord Commander's solar. He had never liked calling it his, and so he thought of it as the solar behind which many men had slept and dreamed badly. He laid the braid on the table and sat, and he took out needle and thread and he stitched, as best he could, the plaited rush back around itself. It was not piety. It was an apology to a ghost. A raven went out that dusk with a message feathered in care. It was addressed to Greywater Watch and to Lord Howland Reed in a hand that was Jon's own and somehow looked like his father's. It named a place by its odd name, Frogmere, and a day when the moon would be a bowl. It said, I will come as far as I may. Said, I will not break what I am. Said, help me not to. The wind moaned under the eaves all that night while he tried to sleep. When he did sleep at last, he dreamed of an empty throne in a hall where the tapestries breathed and of a girl on a horse whose face he could not see because the snow blew between them like a curtain. He awoke to a pink letter that smelled faintly of some fat man's hand sweat and death. Bastard, you have taken my bride. You have stolen my prey. You have sent red-haired whores and false singers into my hall. You have given my name to a letter and called it yours. You are a thief of beds and a thief of victories. You think the wall will protect you. It will not. Snow melts. You will come to me, or I will ride to you with your friends bound behind my horse. I have your king here and his sword and his fake gods, and I will feed the god of fire his own priest until it learns that snow will put it out. Bring me my wife. Bring me the wildling who calls himself a king, and come yourself. When the snow under your boots is red with your heart's blood, I will keep a dog named Snow, and it will be whiter than you because it will be fed. Lord Ramsay Bolton, trueborn of Roose Bolton, warden of the north by the grace of King Tommen. It is a forgery, said Bowen Marsh, and yet his mouth had turned ashy. Or a provocation, or both. We cannot march. We do not march, said Othel Yarwick. We guard the wall. That thing that looks like a city of ice behind us, that is our charge. We are not a northern lord's host. Those men down there drilling, said Satin softly, eyes at the letter as if it would flinch. They think they march if someone blows a horn and calls it holy. Stannis is not here, Jon said. He cannot march. He rode to Deepwood Motte to break the Iron Men and bring the Glover back under his roof. Maybe he is in the snows and maybe he is Ash. We do not know. What we do know is that there are men in Winterfell who made loathsome marriage with the Freys and squatted on my brother's bones. And they think they can call a thing true because they have the quill to write it. They think they can ride the King's Road to my gate and find a watch that forgets what its duty means. No, Bowen said. No, Jon replied. We do not ride south at a pink letter's whim, but we do not sit like stones either. I will send to the mountain clans. I will send to White Harbor. I will. You will do nothing without the Lord of Light's counsel." A voice chimed, and Melisandre was in the doorway, her hair like a bleeding banner. "The letter is bait. Let the fish boil in their own water. If the Boltons believe you will march, let them gather their men while you gather yours." "Our men," Bowen Marsh hissed. "We have black brothers and a king's hired swords. We have wildlings whose oaths were made yesterday, if they were made at all. We have a gate and a wall to hold. We are not a great lord. We raise no banners." Jon's gaze drifted to the window. Snow wrote its silent language. Behind that were forests, and beyond those a long bleak plain, and beyond that the world curved toward the place where no maps were drawn. Somewhere out there, cold older than oaths moved in ways that had nothing to do with letters. "I will ride to the Frogmere," Jon said. "I will go with 10 men and with a flag of truce. If there is more of this letter in the depths of a bog, I would know it. If there is something else, if there is a way to make war that does not break my vows and yet gives the North what the North is owed, then we will speak of that." "You cannot go," Bowen said, horrified. "You are Lord Commander, and a man with blood to answer in one direction and cold to answer in another. 10 men," Jon repeated. "Best riders. Men who can keep their tongues between their teeth and their feet beneath them on rotten ground. I will leave Dolorous Ed to hold Castle Black, and I will return by the 2nd day of the waning moon." "I am coming," said Melisandre, as if anyone had asked her anything. "You're not," Jon said, and she smiled. A slight parting of lips that showed her white teeth and the heat behind them. "We are all so clever," he thought, watching the way Bowen's mouth settled into aggrieved lines, and the way Yarwick's fingers twitched toward the letter as if he wished to wrinkle it small enough to swallow. "We are all so full of answers." He did not feel like a man full of answers. He felt like a man with a dead woman's braid tucked into the inner pocket of his jerkin and a half-memory of a hall that his feet had not walked since he was a boy. They rode at dawn on a day when the sun was an old coin dull with handling. The snow lay thin as paper over the moors, but the bogs drank as they ever drank, and the reeds stood and shivered their dry music. They found the Frogmere by the smell before they saw the dead-still sheet of water, whose surface had the color and consistency of old iron. Winter had skimmed a film over it but had not yet convinced it to freeze. On the farther shore, a stand of leafless willows wrote their crooked signatures on the sky. The Crannogman appeared as the shadows grew long, as if mist had grown a face and then learned to hold a spear. He wore a cloak of mottled green-gray and a hood that made all of him indistinct except the eyes, which were the very opposite of indistinct. "You are the wolf's bastard," the Crannogman said, voice as low as moss. "I am Jon Snow," Jon said. "You came," said a woman's voice behind the Crannogman, and she stepped forward with a grace that would have looked like calculation if she had not carried herself with such frank relish at the making of an entrance. She wore riding leathers under a cloak lined with something tawny and dense, and when she pushed her hood back her hair spilled black down her back. Her skin was copper-dusked. In this gray place, the color of her cheeks and lips was like a memory of fruit. She was not tall, but she stood like someone whose shadow forgot it was supposed to be smaller. The only thing she wore that glittered was the gold sun and spear at her throat. "Arian Nimeros Martell," she said, mouth curving. "My father sends his apologies. He has knees that disobey him and a lifetime's love of warm rooms. He sent me. Will I do? If you were a frothing dog, I would hear you," Jon said. "What you bring matters more than who brings it." At that her mouth stopped curving, and she looked at him with a consideration he had not expected. "You will do," she said, and beckoned. Behind her, men as indistinct as the Crannogman came forward bearing a chest between them. They set it on the bank, and the Crannogman undid a cunning latch hidden under what looked like a knot of wood. Inside the chest, cloth lay folded in layers, each layer bearing marks pressed into wax. They stripped the cloth away one piece at a time. Under the cloth were sealed letters and bundles of coin and a rolled map painted in gem pigments whose colors defied this light. "You will see here," Arian said. knelt on the bank with the map unrolled and pinned by stones. Ports that are ours and towns that are ours and towns that are almost ours because we marry their sons to our daughters and then they forget their names. You will see ship lanes. You will see where our captains can run to ground if a lion sets a chase. My father has no love for war. He would have lived and died a patient man if not for a prince's swollen head and a king's swollen pride. But the bones of pride must be cracked with patient hands all the same. We have gold to hire sell sails. We have ships to carry anything that must be carried north. We have men who can march under the mountain's shadow. We have friends in Old Town who know what books to fetch. My father believes what you said in that letter you sent the night you were chosen. What letter? The one where you wrote, "The true war lies to the north." Do not look so surprised, Lord Snow. One cannot hold the bone way without learning to read between lines carried by sparrows as well as ravens. If you raise the North's banners, Dorne will name your enemy our own. We will not call you bent knee to a stag. We will not call you bent knee to a lion. We will ask of you one thing, and you will not find it bitter unless you have a tongue for sourness. When a queen comes with dragons, you will not set your swords against her. Jon let the words lie a moment. The reeds ticked. Somewhere a water bird made a single hollow-sounding laugh. And if a boy comes with a golden dragon on a field of black? He asked. If he calls himself king with a paper that calls him prince long lost and seeks a woman for his wife? Arianne's gaze slipped for the first time. It was smallest slip, like a foot on scree that finds itself again. If he is who he says he is, my father has a daughter who could be queen. If he is not, my father has a daughter who could bury him without scruple. We have learned to hedge our loves in Dorne. It is a way of being safe. You Northmen find that cowardice. We find it survival. It is both, said the Crannogman quietly, as all the things that keep us alive are both. My father had a friend, Arianne said. Her hands smoothed the map that did not need smoothing. A quiet man who wore drab green and liked to sit in the shade when suns burned. He told my father a story one day, a story about a tower and a bed and a promise, and when he finished telling it he put his head in his hands. My father wept when he told me many years later. He weeps easily when it is men he loves whom he cannot help. This is not a tale to be told in a bog, but if you raise the north for our cause, I will come to your hall and tell it to you there. Then you may decide whether to spit on me or not. Until then, I will say this much. There is a debt in Dorne that touches even Winterfell and the crypt below it. It was like being offered a steel with the edge hidden. Jon thought of the braid in his jerkin. He thought of Sam's face when Sam had told him about the dragon glass found beneath the fist, and of Stannis standing like a hard and stubborn rooted thing, and of Melisandre's hand poised above a brazier as if it were a chessboard. Dorne wants vengeance, he said. The North wants justice. I want men alive on both sides of this wall when the cold ones come below it. If what you offer lets me do all three, then I will take it and I will call it not sour at all. But I will not lead the watch south. I will not break the oaths that keep the wild free folk and the cold at bay. I cannot even be seen to make your cause my own. Then we must teach the North to raise its own banners without calling it breaking, Arianne said. She leaned forward, hair slipping forward like spilled ink, and tapped the map where the white knife widened. The Manderleys will stand. The Umbers, half of them will stand even if the other half would throw stones. The stones will be hollow. Lady Bear will stand because she does things without asking anyone if she should. The mountain clans have long memories. You do not need to ride at their front to make them march. You need a word that tells them they march for something larger than their hearth anger. My father says words are armies of a sort. I will not accept Stannis's paper to make me Lord of Winterfell, Jon said. I did not bring you paper, Arianne said. You carry paper within your own name and you do not even know it. Howland Reed's eyes had not moved. They were the only still things in a world that shifted like water. Robb Stark wrote a will, he said. He wrote it south of the Twins, and I stood for House Reed when it was read, and so did others. It named you his heir should he die without living issue. It had the good wax of a king's seal, though Robb was no king in those lands where he died. He told his mother first when she came to him crying, and he told me next because he trusted me. When the ravens flew, they flew to the wrong roosts. The men who carried that will died. But men like Wyman Manderley do not forget words spoken. The north will rise if given a horn to blow. If you will not blow it, someone else may blow it for you. A hunger rose in Jon that had nothing to do with food. It was a hard, mean, frightened hunger, for a room that would take his hand as easily as it took his father's, for a table with a wolf carved into it, for a voice calling him not bastard but lord. It was as ugly as any hunger, and he recognized it for what it was. "Lord Reed," he said. "If I lifted my head and howled, the men in black would take knives to my ribs by night. I will not lead a mutiny. I will not see the watch split for my name." "No," Reed agreed. "You would be a fool to do that. But there is a way for this to be done that is neither mutiny nor oath-breaking. There is a way you come to the hall with torches and walk through it as a stranger, and the men in it do not mind because you are dead." Melisandre's laughter was soft behind him. He had not heard her step into their lay or the rustle of her gown. "Even a bog understands the ways of rebirth," she said. "Ask the reeds how often they drown and how often they rise green again." "I will not die for a word game," Jon said. "No," Howland Reed replied. "You will die because knives look for you. Men already whisper of breaking. The red letter put a hook in men's bellies. Whether you ride from this wall to a bog or a wedding or a hall will not matter. Steel will find you. But if you are found and drawn back from the shore, then you will not be the same, and men who once were your brothers will be the same, and a door will have opened that no one thinks should be locked. May the gods forgive us," he added, like a man talking to himself. "We fight ghosts with ghosts." Jon wanted to say something angry. He found nothing but a tight dread that folded itself expertly around the things he loved. He stood and the world did not, which steadied him. "Send your men to White Harbor with what you have," he said to Arianne, pointing at the map and the coin and the letters. "Tell Wyman Manderley to bake his pies hot and sharpen his knives. Tell him that if he means to blow a horn, he must find a hill. Tell him to speak of Robb's will to ears that will hear. Do not speak my name to the clans. Let them hear it only when they have already decided it. And whoever comes from the east with dragons, you may remind your father that a dragon's fire cannot reach the thing that is coldest. To fight the true enemy, we must find what burns beneath stone." "I have letters for Old Town," Arianne said. "If your true enemy can be fought with something dug from a cliff, then Old Town will sell it in jars if we give them enough gold to forget what they should not be selling." "Obsidian," Howland said. "Dragon glass. And fire that eats fire," Melisandre breathed, eyes slitting. "It has another name and many names. We will call it what we must." They parted from the bog with no word of farewell, because it seemed the place itself did not believe in farewells. Jon rode back to the wall with 10 men who said nothing at all and a wind that talked too much. At night, they made a low fire in a snow scoop and lay under firs like men listening for a footfall. Jon slept and did not, and when he dreamed, his dream was of a blade sliding under ribs, the small surprise sound he made that shamed him, and a cold photic bloom opening and closing like a flower in the dark. He did not tell anyone about the dream. It was useless learning to be brave after the fact. Winter sharpened itself in the days that followed and then found a new edge again. A ship with striped sails, low and sleek, came foaming up the white knife and slipped into White Harbor with holds bound in tarred cloth and lanterns that made their own steadier weather. Wyman Manderley waddled down to the quay with 6 of his fattest men and a smile that wobbled like pudding, his eyes alight in a way that had nothing of jollity in it. He broke seal after seal with fingers that shook not at all. Later that night, a fry got drunk and went missing. Later still, a pie fed a hall until the candles died. In the rills, a letter found an old woman with gray plate and a temper like vinegar. She read it and sent a boy running to a neighbor whose sons had died at a wedding. At Long Barrow, a man named Wools said nothing to anyone, but he took from a chest a horn wrapped in sealskin, and he set it on the table and looked at it until his daughter told him he was being foolish. On Bear Island, a girl sat by a sluicing door with 2 axes across her knees and asked if these letters had the smell of men who would die for her. She smiled when an old crone said yes. In the dread fort, Roose Bolton read his own letters and measured men and saw that they did not weigh as much as he had thought they would. In Winterfell, Ramsay Bolton lay on his back beside a dark-haired girl whose tears had dried on her face and told her stories of flaying as if they were poems, because he thought fairy tales were for people who had earned gentleness and he had not. In King's Landing, a queen mother dreamed of herself as a lioness whose claws were always clean because other people got their hands dirty. In Old Town, a novice with eyes like a cat's sneaked a look at a tiled floor where a map of the world lay and wondered if the green glass candles his elders whispered about would wake again when dragons came and, if they did, whether he dared to touch one. In the snow, Jon did his sums and his drills and his rounds and told himself that he could be the one thing every man thinks he can be until he has to. The hinge that does not break when the door swings too wide. The letter that would kill him came as easily as the snow that accompanied it. He held it up to the window, the wax seal cracked and badly done, the hand too neat for the words it bore. He felt the hall breathe around him as men read over one another's shoulders without admitting it. He called the wildlings. He called the Queen's men. He called for men to be given horses and saddlebags. He called for a sword to be sharpened. He called for Mance Rayder, though he knew that the man Melisandre had named Mance and made play a song was no king at all. He called for patience and got looks like knives back. Then he walked out into the yard into that frail daylight and he felt the world narrow until it was a tunnel carved through snow and men. He saw the glint that men think is a friend. He saw the arm that moves from the shoulder and the elbow like a thought made flesh. He stepped and turned and lifted his left arm and the point burned like liquid ice through cloak and leather and skin. He heard himself make the noise he had heard in his dream. It was not a dying animal sound. It was his own sound. It shamed him anyway. "For the watch," said Wick Whittlestick, face working, and stabbed him in the belly where a man as often as not holds the sum of his life. "For the watch," said Bowen Marsh, crying as he did it, which is a thing men like to think they will not do when they do ugly things. Jon fell. The snow caught him. It did not soften him. His breath ran away from him. He thought of Ghost. He thought of Winterfell in summer when the gods would smelled of leaf and damp earth. He had no right to that memory and he took it anyway. He thought of a letter that had not called him by the name that had been his for all of his life. Melisandre's face bent over his like a moon that burned instead of lit. He wanted to tell her to leave him to the dark, but her hands were on him before his wish had a mouth to speak. Warmth poured into him in a way that made warmth a weapon. He went away then, or deeper, or outward. There was no language for the direction. On the far side of that, something waited. It was not a voice, not exactly. It was the feel of fur, the taste of blood in the mouth that exhilarated and disgusted, the knowing of a rabbit's heart beating through snow a yard beneath, the joy of a run that does not tire, the knowledge that a man was a stupid, slow-skulled thing and that a wolf was not. He went toward it because it was there. It went through him because that was how such things were done. For a time that could have been a blink or a winter, he was not a man and the wall was a shaping of ice in the corner of an eye that saw in white and gray and black. When he came up from that again, he came hard, as if born through ice. Melisandre was chanting and the red between her hands pulsed like a heart. Her eyes had rolled back until only a thin crescent of blue showed, and a line of blood had run from her nose into the crease of her mouth. Ghost stood over Jon's legs with teeth bared and hair like spilled milk standing on end, a growl low in his throat that did not end. "Back," Jon said, or thought he did. The word was a scrape of stone. Ghost did not step back, but the growl softened into something like a question. "Live?" Melisandre gasped, in a very small voice that had nothing to do with priestess or power. For once, live. So he did. The men who had stabbed him fled or were bound. Those who had cheered them stood a long time with empty hands until their shoulders sagged. Bowen Marsh sat down very gently and very clumsily at once, as if his bones had been re-articulated by a child. "I thought," Bowen said to no one, "I thought I would feel better. It hurts." "Everything hurts," said Dolorous Ed from a corner, as if that were philosophy. Jon bound his own wounds with hands that shook more from cold than shock. or so he told himself. He lay 2 nights with fever, and the 3rd night he walked the wall, and the 4th night he walked it again, because if he did not, then the rope around his heart would tighten, and he feared what would happen if it did. On the 5th morning he sent ravens. The words were brief and careful and would never be proof of anything in any court. They were the sort of words that live on men's tongues and in the joints of plans. They were the words men could nod at without needing to go to war with themselves. To Wyman Manderley, Lord of White Harbor. The North should remember that it remembers. To the mountain clans. The snows are deep, but they will not stop men who know the mountains. There are deer in these woods that were grown to be hunted by you. Come to the place where the wolf still runs. To Meege Mormont in her grave, and Alisane and Dacey in memory, and Lyra and Jarell alive. Bear Island feeds itself on a winter night. There will be men at your shore who cannot make their own bread. Give them bread. Ask for oaths. Keep them. To Arian Martell, your father wrote of patience that waited too long. Tell him that patience is almost done. He did not tell Melisandre anything at all. He did not want to hear that he had been born anew. If he had been born anew, he was born with the same old loves and thus the same old weaknesses, which meant nothing had changed except everything. He went to the ice cell where the Queen's man known as Rattleshirt had been put after it turned out he had never been Rattleshirt at all but a king named in songs. He sat opposite him and said, "Mance, there is a place in the bog where words can do work. Will you go with me quietly or loudly?" "Quietly," Mance said, amused. "Loud would get me dead. And I just got used to the quiet inside my head again." Dolorous Ed came with them. Tormund came without being asked. They rode under a sky so pale it had to be a color other than white, though no one had named it. They went to the bog, and their Arian Martell sat on a stone like a cat lounging near a fire, and Howland Reed stood like a tuft of grass that had found a rock worth clutching. Mance Rayder looked at them both and yawned. "I am told," he said, "that we do marriages up north like tying socks together so you do not lose one in the wash. Who am I marrying today?" "No one," Arian told him. "You are going to sing. Not here. In White Harbor. In a hall that loves a singer who can prick a lord and leave him bleeding and dancing both." "What do I sing?" "You sing a song about wolves and debts and daughters that do not stay buried," she said. "And you sing it so well that in the morning old men who cannot remember their sons' faces can recite the chorus. Then a fat lord stands and says words he has been keeping like a fine wine. He speaks of a dead boy who was a king. He speaks a dead boy's wishes. He names a name that is not a bastard's. Then he says what Dorne brings, and he says what the neck brings, and he says what the wolves bring, and he says, 'We will do this thing.' And the most obstinate people in the world nod because they love nothing more than a thing called old that is actually new." "I like that song," Mance said. "When do we leave?" The cinnamon wind slipped into White Harbor with her decks hung with bells that chimed like rain in the sea wind. A woman with hair like salt and molasses came down her gangplank with 3 men behind her. 2 wore robes of a cut that made their steps look like the gliding of gulls. They carried crates that clinked when moved and had a smell like flint struck hard and hot. The harbor master sniffed. "Glass," he said greedily. The night Mance sang. The hall looked like a whale's belly, fat with people and hung with lights that swayed as if the sea had decided to put its finger to its lips and hush. He sang of oaths and the beheading of a man who had set honor above survival because he was too proud to understand that honor is a kind of survival if you do it right. He sang of wolves who howled for a boy drowned north of the neck. He sang of eyes like winter and the little heat that men can make by holding one another close. He sang something that tasted like salt at the back of the tongue. When he finished, Wyman Manderley stood up and put his hands on the table and said, "The North remembers." And he said it like a man who had not been allowed to remember out loud in a long time and had discovered, suddenly, that his voice could still make the right shape of the word. He spoke then of Robb's will, and he spoke of the men who had been meant to carry it and of where their bones presently lay. He spoke of ships and spears and dragonglass and of men in black who would not march south and of men in furs who would. He did not say Jon Snow's name until the end, and when he did, he said it with an artistry that made the word Lord sound like the name of a boy who had climbed trees barefoot and come down with knees full of bramble thorns and a grin. "King," he said musingly, "I am but a liege man. I make no kings. but I make sure my bread rises and my vows stand. If a man is a king in all but the crown will find him when it needs to. In the meantime, we shall not sit at a table where flayed men carve the roast and call themselves gracious. It was done then, not holy, not cleanly, not in the way that men in storybooks clap their hands and take swords down from walls, and the next morning the road is black with marching boots and shining spears. It was done like winter is done. A drift here, a crust there, a roof that gives beneath weight that no one quite noticed until it had been building for months. Jon did not ride at their head. He did not need to. He sent letters. He sent quiet men with better tongues than his. He sent Davos Seaworth, found in White Harbor half-starved and wholly loyal to the notion of keeping his war. To Skagos to fetch Rickon Stark if Rickon Stark could be fetched. He sent Mance to sing in halls where men sat and stared at their own hands and thought about brothers slain and meat taken away and names given back. He sent Arion Martell's letter to Lady Serwyn and Brandon Norrie and to Barbary Dustin, who looked at it and smiled in a thin way and asked her maids to find her a cloak that was not brown. He sent to Stannis where Stannis might be. He sent to Melisandre where Melisandre always was. He stood on the wall and watched the pale day pass like a breath caught and made to last, and he felt the thing in him that had been torn open scab. When it began in a flurry of ravens out of the rills and a skein of men moving along the headwaters like ants along a log that had fallen across a stream. The umbers came down like weather, and Lady Mead's daughters came across the ice like women who had been told once too often they could not and had decided to accomplish everything simply to prove it. Wyman Manderly's ships took men up the white knife in bellies that stank of fish and vinegar and new wine, and when they came a-tilting around the low bend where the timber camps lay, cheering rose like smoke from men who had not known they still had it in them. A line of banners unfurled like a row of tongues, and for a moment, on the hill above, a banner that showed a sun framed by spear points moved in the cold. The march to Winterfell was a march like any other until it wasn't. Snow deepened. Men stumbled and cursed and laughed and made fellows of their curses. The storm that had been nursing itself in the hills came down as a beast. Ramsay's dogs howled in their kennels and went quiet when the wind changed, as if something had told them that this was not a hunt they understood. Under Winterfell's walls, Wyman Manderly set up a kitchen. He did not tell anyone what he would cook. Behind him, men with shovels worked quietly as if digging gardens. On the third day, a body was found half-eaten by dogs. On the fifth day, a fry tripped and broke his neck in a place where no one would expect to trip and no one would expect a neck to break that easily. On the seventh day, a man with the dim, distant eyes of someone who had grown up in a salt marsh walked into the great hall with a bundle slung over his shoulder and laid it on the trestle table. He unrolled it and steel slid out, and then the head it had once belonged to. The steel had an edge like midnight. The head had eyes frozen open. "The North sends back what is not ours," the man said, and somewhere a woman who had been silent for a year started laughing and weeping at once. The gates of Winterfell did not fall to a siege tower or a ram. They fell to a door on a lesser tower that had not been properly bolted, and to Theon Greyjoy's hands on the inside of that bolt. He had every right to be too afraid to lift it, and he did it anyway. He saw the white of snow swirling through the crack he made and breathed in the cold as if it were a drug to steady him. The first men through were not the great. They were men with knives and axes and their father's anger. They went through the lower halls like a flood seeking the lowest place. A woman ran, hair loose, cheeks raw from weeping for a year. She clutched a small hand in hers, and that hand was white with cold and too small for any name but one that had been stolen and another that had been given. She turned and she saw Theon and she hated him and she took his hand. "We will die," she said, astonished. "Not if we run," Theon said. Wyman Manderly waddled into a kitchen with his sleeves rolled up and smiled at a cook who had once cooked for him. "You do not salt your pie enough," he said, and showed the man how much was enough. When he brought the pie out to where Lord Ramsay Bolton stood with a rubicund face and an appetite for other people's fear, he bowed. "My lord," he said. "For you, the pretty one," Ramsay said, through a mouthful of crust. And he meant the girl with the blue eyes and the white skin marked brown by old drops of candle fat. He did not get her. He got a knife in the ribs from her instead. He looked down at it and then laughed, delighted with the surprise, and then stopped laughing as the pain got larger than his amusement. The knife was not deep. The men around her made sure she did not deliver another. The doors flew wide. Men whose feet had grown used to marching on snow saw flagstones and beheld them like expanse of a new world. The hall stank of smoke and hot meat and fear. Ramsay's dogs, turned loose, made the mistake of racing for the meat and the bigger mistake of not understanding that the men with axes had seen wolves and did not fear dogs. One dog made it to a gate and then lay down and died without ever understanding why. Roose Bolton vanished into a passage like a man who possessed the art of vanishing and did not want to use it too often lest it wear out. It would have become a great slaughter if not for the snow. The snow muffled everything. It muffled steps and it muffled screams, and it made men tired in a way that made them too slow to kill more than they absolutely had to. Jon arrived when the yards were already a confusion of blood and drift, and he went wherever a man needed to be thrown backward off a stair. He did not seek Ramsay. He did not seek anyone. He broke a man's wrist who had a little boy by the hair. He dragged a girl under a table and sat with her in the dark while boots went by like the passing of a parade in hell. "It hurts," she whispered against his coat, and he said, "Aye." And he took her hand as if he had the right. Later, in the square, they found Ramsay's sign. A flayed man worked and swayed by some fastidious servant's hand, and they tramped it into the snow until not a thread showed. Later still, Theon came to Jon with his hair stuck to his head and his eyes big. "I can find him," he said. "I can find the Lord. He goes where the cold is thickest. He likes how it smells. He likes the stillness." "Then we go," Jon said. They did not find Ramsay. They found, instead, a room where a girl had been tied up and forgotten, and a place on a wall where a man had made scratches to count nights and then stopped scratching. They found a kennel that had been used for something other than dogs. The hair along Jon's arms stood up as if it had its own mind. They found, under a barrel in a larder, a rolled parchment tied with string that had written on it a long list of names. Some had little notches by them. Some did not. The notches meant something that no one put into words. They found Roose Bolton at last in the Godswood, where he had gone to stand beneath the heart tree and ask a favor that there was no favor in the world left to ask. He stood as if carved from the same wood as the tree. He did not look surprised when the men came up behind him. He did not look surprised when a hand reached for his sleeve and drew him around to face judgment. He looked mildly bored. "You cannot keep what you stole," Jon said. "I did not steal," Roose Bolton said. "I collected. The world is a debtor. I do not like to see ledgers left unbalanced." He turned away and then turned back, like a lizard measuring the temperature of a rock with his belly. "You are a bastard," he said. "You were born for the wrong end of things." "We shall see," Jon said, and then it was done, and the snow took Roose Bolton into itself without a ripple. They did not crown Jon in the Godswood. They did not crown him at all. Crowns require a stillness that no one could find. They hung banners. They opened the doors that had been shut. They let fires burn in rooms that had forgotten warmth. And in the midst of this, the men who had been whispering names out of old habit began to say Jon's in a new tone. The bear said it. Manderly said it. The mountain men said it in grunts which counted for the same. The Umbers said it once they had decided they were done being angry with one another. Sansa was not there. Arya was not there. Bran was not there. Rickon perhaps was not yet anything but a promise, but the house stood and it had a man in it who would die for it. It is astonishing how often that is sufficient. Arion Martell came north like a person who did not know fear and therefore frightened many men who considered fear the proper seasoning for anything worth undertaking. She walked through Winterfell's gate with her head uncovered despite the cold so everyone could see the color of her skin. She stood in the great hall where the stones had exhaled enough fear lately to make a new climate, and she smiled with all the candor of someone who had chosen her expression with care and found it becoming. "My father sends you salt and bread," she said to Jon, and a man behind her set down a tray with a loaf in a wicker frame and a salt cellar carved into a sun. "He also sends you a letter wherein he speaks of spears that would like to stand in the snow and coins that would like to spend themselves on dragonglass." He must like to spend, Wyman said cheerfully. He and I will have much to talk about. We have fought your enemies, Jon said to Aerion. But in doing so, we sharpen the fight with a different enemy. The throne will call us rebels. The roses will not fight for us. The lions will fight against us. The krakens will always do what krakens do. The stag, there may be one in a forest somewhere. Dorne will march. Dorne will march, she said. We will not march to King's Landing. We will not break ourselves against a wall of gold and stupidity. We will take the Bone Way. We will hold the passes. We will make the Reach watch us. We will send ships up the Mander and up the Blackwater, and we will not do any of this loudly until men in the city look up and find the wrong banners near their doors. We will spend money in Old Town and find out how much obsidian a conscientious man can move in a week when the ripe palms are full. My father says this will be done quietly until it cannot be done quietly anymore, and then it will be a storm. He also says that a storm is only comforting to those who have a roof. I have a roof, Jon said. I did not always. I want the roof for others. Then you require a treaty that spares you from being accused too early of wanting what you in truth must hold, Aerion said, eyes bright. Call it the Pact of Spear and Wolf. Call it the Pact of Stone and Sand. Call it whatever you like. We will write words, and men will pretend the words are iron. And while they are pretending, we will move iron. They wrote the pact in a room that had smelled for years of parchment and candle grease and now smelled of people. Howland Reed wrote his name like a smudge. Aerion Martell wrote hers in a hand as clean and sharp as the spear she wore at her throat. Wyman Manderly's signature took up more space than it needed because he had earned that indulgence. Jon signed last. He wrote John and almost wrote Snow out of habit, and then he did not write it, and he did not write Stark either. He let the ink stop, and 2 drops gathered on the nib and fell, one after the other, looking in the candlelight like very small, very patient suns. There were other letters. One went to Old Town with coins stitched into the hem of its bearer's cloak. Another went south along the King's Road with a courier who would stop at every inn and not hide. One went east with the cinnamon wind to Bravos, and from there perhaps, to wherever dragons currently cast their shadows. Winterfell changed by inches. Men learned to say the word Dorne without making it into a joke. Women who had not left their halls in years came to the yard to see the spears that gleamed like summer sunlight. The men of the mountain clans looked at those spears with the narrow-eyed, calculating distrust of hunters examining another hunter's dog, and then stopped looking and began to speak to the men who carried them because language cannot resist itself when it sees its own reflection in another mouth. Children ran their hands along the smooth wood of the shafts and asked if the sand that these men came from was like snow made warm. Tormund told them yes. He told everyone yes. He told an outlandish lie about a sand bear that rolled down dunes and came up full of fish, and half the little ones believed him and the other half laughed so they would not have to admit they did. Melisandre watched all this without smiling, and when Jon went to her she said, "The sun moves. It will move into shadow if you do not catch it by the rim and turn it yourself." "What does that mean?" Jon said, bone-tired. "It means your dead are not done with you," she replied. "They never are. I hear them in the night, asking you for warmth. You do not know how to say no. You must learn." At night, Jon walked through halls that had forgotten footsteps and now remembered them, and he looked at the carved direwolves that ramped on door lintels, and 2 of them seemed to watch him as if waiting for him to say their names correctly. He went to the crypt with a candle, because there are always candles in stories, and he was not sure if this was one. And he stood before a stone that said Eddard and a stone that said Lyanna, and he took the braid out of his jerkin and laid it between them as if laying a single small bridge over a chasm that no bridge could span. "I am told," he murmured, though to whom he did not know, "that there is a debt that ties north to south. I am told that I should pay it with the lives of men who call me brother and with the lives of men who call me lord. I will pay it if I must, but I will not pay it in a currency that makes me a bastard forever." Ghost lay at the foot of the steps, just beyond the edge of the pooled darkness, as if guarding the door for the world outside the dead. Days turned and turned again. Aerion proved as deft with faces as with maps. She ate with Manderly and laughed at his jokes, which were bad, and with Lady Meech's daughters, and hammered her palm to the tabletop when their stories reached the part where a man who had doubted them found himself with his nose broken. She walked the yard in a cloak lined with the skin of some southern animal, whose fur lay like river water under a breeze, and the mountain men pretended not to look. She sat with Howland Reed and said nothing for long stretches, both of them looking into whatever the fire had to say. She went to the godswood and stood under a heart-shaped leaf that had gone brown and brittle and said, out loud to no god anyone north of the neck would have identified as theirs, "This is not my place, and yet I am here. That must count for something." News came, as it always does, first like smoke and then like fire. Stannis Baratheon had not been eaten by snow. He had put the Riswells to flight near a crofter's village and taken hostages not because he loved hostages, but because they loved him. Then there was word that he had died after all, and that his queen had set herself on a pyre, and then there was word these words had been put into men's mouths by someone with a knife's idea of humor. Jon learned to let news pass through him the way wind goes through an empty place. Word came from Skagos that Davos Seaworth had landed and exchanged gifts. Arnulf Karstark's head for a measure of salt beef. The promise of a boy with a direwolf for a promise of bread forever whenever bread could be spared. If Davos did not return, Jon told himself, it would not have been the sea's fault. It would have been because the boy had decided to live in a place where no one would ever find him again. Given the world, that might not be a sin. Word came from King's Landing that the Queen Mother had walked and the people had thrown filth and some had thrown flowers, which tells you everything you need to know about people. Word came from Old Town that a candle burned now in a tower where none had burned in 100 years, and that every novice who had ever dreamed of strange knowledge had stopped sleeping and started to look very earnestly at his hands as if there were answers in the lines. Then a different kind of news came. It came on the claws of a bird that looked small only because the sky was so large. It came in a hand that had written with more flourish than any northerner would ever tolerate from himself. It said, "To Jon of Winterfell at present and whatever he will be next, the world turns faster than men. Aegon, son of Rhaegar, has set foot on Storm's End. He holds it. He holds the storm, the end, and his own name. I write this to you not because my father is old and cannot hold a quill without pain, though that is true, but because he loves you more than he knows how to say. He wants to call you by a name that would make you hate him, and so he will not. You will do what is wise. If you throw your sword against mine, we will both die and the world will say, 'There were two fools and their names were both hero.' If you hold your sword while I hold mine, the world will name one of us tyrant and the other savior, and it will not matter which because the others do not care. Arianne Nymeros Martell, Princess of Dorne in all but name." Jon read it twice. He took it to Melisandre and she touched the ink with one long forefinger and said, "The boy is a boy until fire decides otherwise. Your danger is not from him." "From what then?" Jon asked. "From the thing that all men suffer most," she said. "From seeing your own face in someone else's and believing it lowers you. From men who cannot bear to see a bastard win. From knives in quiet halls." He thought of knives. He thought of his own blood on snow. He smiled and did not mean to. "We shall keep a better watch," he said. When the first white shadow came, it came not with trumpets or written words, but on a moonless night when the wind had gone somewhere else and the trees had decided not to talk to one another. The watcher on the eastern parapet, a boy with a beard that came in like frost and not fast, looked down and saw a moving not unlike the moving of fog, and he told himself it was fog. He told himself that 3 times, because 3 is the number of lies men tell themselves before they move, and on the 4th time he rang the bell. They went to the wall with torches that looked absurd against that much black. They went to the gate and through the bars and stepped out onto snow that had that strange, absolute quiet that means something is listening to you. The forms came closer, and the closer they came, the farther away they seemed. Jon stood with Ghost at his shoulder and a dragonglass dagger in his left hand and Longclaw in his right, and tried very hard to remember that fear is only useful if it points. The first one he saw had a crown made of nothing except air that had decided to harden into a shape that remembered crowns. It had a sword that made the sound ice makes when one piece rubs against another for a long time. Its eyes were blue, but not the blue of water or sky. They were the blue of something discovered under ice that makes a man want to stop breathing just to hear if his breath truly is as loud as he fears. It raised its sword in a gesture that, for a stupid moment, Jon thought might be a salute. Then it moved, and it did not move fast, and yet the world rearranged itself around its moving. Men stepped and fell and rose made into something simpler than they had been. Fire guttered as if embarrassed to be so poor a thing. The dragonglass in Jon's hand felt like a promise that had been waiting at a gate for a century and was now impatient. When the blade of the other met Longclaw, the sound was like slow lightning. He parried and stepped and parried again and felt his hand go numb to the elbow. Ghost leaped and was swatted in a way that would have broken any dog that was not made of a portion of winter itself. The others were not there in numbers that night to break anything holy. They had come to measure. What met them was not merely men either. Men with spears from certain lands where men were little on their feet ran down a stair and stood with their feet set and their bodies bent in a way that made their silhouettes into the memory of a bird. Their spearheads were bound up in cloths that had been soaked in oil and something else. When they thrust and drew back, frost steamed from the wounds they made. Melisandre stood on the inner wall and chanted, and in a brazier where nothing had been an hour before, a fire went up in a slow column, and when it reached a hand's height above the brazier, it stopped rising and simply burned, making a ring of light the others would not cross. They withdrew. They withdrew like ice melting in reverse. They withdrew with dignity. Jon's breath came back like an insult given up on. He stood there as the last of them went into the darkness and listened to the sound the men around him made when they remembered that their hearts could beat without being told to. Arion came to him then, hair wrapped close under a furred cap, cheeks flushed in a way that shocked him with its beauty because beauty in that moment seemed a dangerous thing that should have been kept under lock. She touched the dragonglass in his hand with 2 fingers. "This has a good feel to it," she said lightly. "It has the feel of something that has waited a long time to be used," he said. "We will use it." "Good," she said, and then her mouth twisted momentarily. "I grew up under a sun that left no shadows worth speaking of. I thought once that a winter like this would be a great adventure. I was a stupid girl, but I am not sorry I came. My father wanted me to see what a story looks like when you walk inside of it." "I do not want to be in a story," Jon said. "No one does until they cannot help it," she replied gently. "Take your victories. Tell yourself they are small if you must." This was a victory. It felt like something smaller than that, something that would be big later when told. It felt like a notch cut into a tree a man means to return to. It felt like news. News moved south. There were men in Old Town who had lit candles and now found their dreams crowded with cold stares. There were men on the stepstones who had put spear points in kills and then in tar and then into crates and then onto ships and had never known what they would actually be used for. There were men in King's Landing who told jokes about Northerners and then forgot the punchlines and felt bad and did not know why. In Winterfell, men and women learned new ways to live in old rooms. They learned to pass one another spears by the haft and not the head. They learned that when someone shouted, "Dragonglass," what was meant to happen next had to happen quickly. They learned to stop jumping when the white wolf padded past them like a drift put on legs. Jon learned to sleep for an hour at a time and to dream in brief, dry snatches of a woman whose hair smelled of snow and a woman whose hair smelled of sun when shaken out in a courtyard. He learned that hunger for a hall and a table does not go away when you get them. It just empties itself and fills again, and sometimes the thing you put in is not what you wanted to be full of. He learned that he loved the way the men in the yard looked up when he crossed it. A man can lie to himself only so far as his eyes let him. On the day the raven came with Daenerys Targaryen's name in its crop, it was snowing in a fashion that would, in any just world, have stayed someone's hand. It did not stop anything. The bird beat against the parapet like a small, patient fist. It flung itself into a hand and sagged, and then jerked its head up and croaked, "Dragon." It made the word sound as if it had learned it from someone who had meant to terrify it. Inside the leather tube bound to its leg, a strip of parchment had written on it in a hand that looked like it had been taught in a place where lines and discipline were both considered the same virtue. To the Lord of Winterfell, in fact, or the man who keeps his fires burning there regardless, Daenerys Stormborn has come to Dragonstone. She does not ask. She does not demand. She announces. The queen you said you would not turn your sword against is on this side of the sea, and she has 3 reasons for men to love her and to fear her both. The young man with the black dragon on Goldhold Storm's End with half the Stormlands and all his insolence. The Reach sniffs wind. The lions play with a faith they do not understand. The North must choose an order to its enemies and friends. My father says the order must be cold first, lion second, dragons after, but he would say that because he is old and his bones ache and a dragon's fire would feel good on them. I have seen the wall now. I have laid a hand on it. I do not think dragons will like it, but they will fly over anything. Arian. He read it under an arch where the wind could not come and the stone could keep a man's back very honestly. He thought of a girl born in a storm and a boy who claimed the name of a dead prince and a host of quiet men under snow. He thought of a vow made long before he was born and of another made by his own lips in a hall that stank of smoke and old blood. He went to the yard and looked up at the sky, because it was habit now, because he half expected to see wings fill it before he could finish a breath. He did not see wings. He saw snow. He felt ghost lean against his leg. He heard, faintly, in the place inside where wolves make their noise, the sound of pack moving. He closed his eyes and laid his palm against the roughness of Longclaw's hilt. We will make a place where a dragon can land and not burn what it lands on, he said, to no one in particular. We will tell the queen that the dead do not kneel and that we have learned from them. We will tell the boy who calls himself king that a second song will only make men deaf when they need to hear calls. We will cut obsidian until our hands bleed. We will show the South how to fight a thing that leaves no bodies. We will keep our roof. Lord, said a voice behind him, and he turned and saw Arian with a fur wrapped about her shoulders. A look on her face that was both delight and something like grief grown tall. Someone had to tell you to come eat. There is stew. Manderly has cooked it himself. We cannot refuse. We cannot, Jon said. If we did, he would look like a boulder crying. Has your dead mother stopped speaking to you? Arian asked lightly as they walked. It was a soft mockery and a mercy both, and he liked her the more for it. Has your dead father started? They are very quiet lately, Jon said. I believe they are waiting. For what? For me to stop being a boy. Arian laughed at that, but not cruelly. Ah, we are all waiting for that. The hall was loud when they entered, and warm. Wyman Manderly stood behind a great iron pot with a ladle that looked as if he had stolen it from a giant's kitchen, and he smiled until the meat of his face trembled. Eat, he commanded, as if stew were orders. Eat, my lord. Eat, my lady. Eat enough to make your bones remember before the next riding and the one after that. There will be many ridings. There will be better meals than this. There will be worse. There will be songs, and some of them will be sad. They ate. The stew was salty and very brown and full of things that had been alive not long ago. Men told stories with their hands and laughed with their heads thrown back, because laughing with heads thrown back is something men like to do when they want to be sure there is still a ceiling. Later, alone by a window where the wind pawed at the shutters and found them stout, Jon unrolled a fresh piece of parchment and dipped his quill. He wrote to Daenerys Targaryen and he wrote to Aegon. Even the name looked like a boast made by someone who did not understand boast's gravity. And he wrote to Doran Martell, and the words he used were not words that men would one day quote to prove rightness or wrongness. They were plain words. They said, if you will set aside a war that can be put aside, come north. Bring fire that does not burn men. Stand under a sky that the dead walk beneath. You will find the North's banners raised for Dorne's cause, because Dorne's cause is justice, and we have discovered that justice is a fence that keeps the cold off men's skin and lets them sleep. You will find us ready to pay old debts with coin and not with children this time. He sanded the letters and he sealed them. He sat a long time with the last in his hands. He wanted to write another, to no one, to everyone, to a dead woman and a dead man, and to a boy with a sword cut out of a story. He did not. He blew the candle out and he leaned his head against the cold stone of the window embrasure and listened to the sound the wind made when it had to push itself through the narrow places men had left for it. The morning brought no dragons. It brought men who smelled of forge and sweat and the satisfaction of having made good blades out of black glass. and women who carried baskets of bread that had risen under quilts in rooms where children had slept wearing hats. It brought a raven with a strip of old maester's vellum bound to its leg, bearing a hand he did not know that said only, "The candle burns. Tell your fire to look." He took that to Melisandre. She touched it to her lips as if it were a relic of some very private saint. "We will look," she said, "and we will light more. There are many towers that need looking from." By the time the sun reached the point it sometimes reached this time of year before sinking grudgingly, the yard was full of men moving in ways that no longer looked like practice. Jon stood over them and looked past them and thought of a road that bent south and a pass that bent east and a list of names that had been found rolled under a barrel. He thought of a girl in a court where the air would be salt and heat who had been told that dragons were born to men but was finding out that they were born to their own purposes. He went down among his men and he took a spear from a Dornishman's hand and he thrust with it and he found its balance and he smiled without meaning to. He passed the spear on. He took a dragonglass dagger and slid it back into its sheath, the edge so fragile and perfect it looked like smoked ice. He handed that back as well. He took Longclaw out of habit more than need. He raised it and the men in the yard stopped and the sound died, and for a moment it seemed as if the snow had stopped falling. "We will march," he said, and he did not shout. "Not all at once, not toward the wrong thing. We will hold the wall and we will hold the passes. We will send what we have to those who need it. We will teach men far from this place how to fight a thing that makes a mock of fighting. We will not go to a throne until the throne needs us. We will not call ourselves what we are not until the world calls us it first and cannot take it away." The men listened. The wind listened. Somewhere in a city made of black stone and the sea, a woman raised her head and said a man's name she did not know yet how to pronounce. Somewhere in a fortress above a shore where waves hit like fists, a boy with a prince's name spoke to a sword as if it could answer. Somewhere in Sunspear, a man with a gouty foot put it up and read a letter and pressed 2 fingers to his eyes and said a prayer that was not to any god anyone else would recognize. The snow began to fall again, tender as if humbling itself. Jon watched it and then he moved, and the men moved and Winterfell moved. Stones that had been heavy for so long learning to shift again under the weight of a thing called purpose. Night came and no one told it not to. The stars were pinpricks visible through thin cloud where the wind worried it. Ghost lay with his head on Jon's boot, and Arianne sat with her elbows on a table, eyes narrowing over a map whose ink was still damp in places. Howland Reed slept as a man sleeps who knows that he will be asked tomorrow to say a thing no man should, and is trying to borrow strength from a small silence beforehand. Jon did not sleep. He stood in the yard and looked toward the road that did not yet hold dragons and thought, "When they come, we will know whether we did right." He felt cold. He felt alive. He felt like a boy who has grown tall without noticing and discovered that the clothes he wears do not fit and never will again. He felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned and there was no hand. He laughed under his breath because a man who cannot laugh at ghosts will be undone by them. He lifted his head and listened to the sound the wall made when the night shifts inside it. It was the sound of old ice remembering rivers. It was the sound of vows compacting under the weight of new ones. It was as steady as a breath taken deliberately and released. Somewhere beyond what his eyes could see and his mind could name, something stirred its wings. Dorne's cause moved northward in whispers and torchlight and spears, and the North's banners did what they had always waited to do. Under them and between them, men set about making a world that would not have their sons for meat. That work had the taste of iron and hope and regret. It was not a song. It did not need to be. It was enough.